Massachusetts for their Glory IPA tonight.
There you go.
Or Ultra.
Beautiful. And Ralph Tamboro of the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. Ralph and I have known each other for a long time. And Ralph, give your spiel. Who are you? What you doing?
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, depending on where you are. Maybe even good morning.
There you go.
I've been involved in New York aviation for longer than I'd like to say, but it's been over 38 years. I started in the New York Approach Control back in 1982. After the strike, spent my entire FAA career at that facility, various jobs. The last job was the traffic management officer, who was responsible for flows in and out of New York. Was my actually dream job. Never wanted to do anything but that job. So it was great to be in it. I was in it for about 7 years. I did leave the FAA and was hired by the Port Authority under airport delay reduction. The current title is airport delay reduction and airspace modernization. So this falls right into that job title, which is great. We've been approached by several companies talking about eVTOL in the future. And like Ray said, this is the market. COVID has put a little damper on it, but I think that will change rapidly over the next year or so as things settle down a little bit. But this is the market for it. Uber and Blade were both very successful with their helicopter operations, and they were basically just flying to either Newark downtown or Kennedy downtown, and it was very successful. I mean, the growth was pretty impressive, even over a couple of month period.
So Ralph, you have some idea what the number of movements was and what the growth was like?
We went from Kennedy's the best example. Newark always had a lot of helicopter operations, as did LaGuardia, but Kennedy was one of those that never really had too many, and it went from basically 100 a month to 600 to 700 a month. And that was in a very short period of time, just over a couple of month period. So they were pretty successful with it. We didn't really have many issues because it's helicopter. They were following normal procedures. It's airside, they were landing at the FBO. So it was relatively easy to transition to that. This is going to be a lot different in my mind. Maybe to start off, we could actually do something similar to follow the helicopter model. But I could tell you, based on my conversations, they expect the growth to be pretty tremendous. And that's actually my fear, is that controlling growth to not impact the normal operation. That is really our goal, right? We want eVTOL. We love the idea. We think it's great. It's we fully support it, but we have to be careful that we don't impact the normal operations.
So that's where the cost per seat comes into play there. You get cheaper form of transportation, makes it more available to the public, just like airlines did, through the 80s and 90s there, right? It's easy to jump on a plane and go to Florida now and come back.
Yeah, no, I mean, the prices they were talking about, similar to taking a car trip.
We're going to dig into that a little bit, because those economics are interesting if you really look into them. Real quickly, Ralph, what are you drinking?
I got Jack and Amaretto. One of my
Jack
favorite.
and Amaretto.
Nice.
Real quickly, let me just give a little bio about myself. I'm Ray Adams. I'm the executive director of Ultra. Ron and I formed this little venture back in January of 2020. I've been an air traffic controller for over 30 years, with about 28 and a half of it in the New York City metropolitan area at the center, New York Center, and at Newark Airport. I'm still a controller at Newark Air Traffic Control Tower, actually, until I retire, which COVID has not let me do, unfortunately, at this point. So I'm absolutely immersed in this airspace. I've worked the helicopters in and out. I've seen the explosion of helicopter tour operations. I've seen the explosion of the Uber and Blade air mobility models. I've seen this airspace at its best, and I've seen this airspace at its worst. And Ralph's smiling because he knows when it's bad, it's bad, right? So it's arguably the busiest, most complex airspace in the world. Although right now it's pretty quiet because COVID kind of put the kibosh on most of the flights. But you go back to last summer, and we were killing it. There were, you're running 1.5 million operations IFR out of this area every single year. That and your VFR operations on that airspace that's behind Peter there, that's the Hudson River corridor, and you actually look at the East River. But basically, that whole thing down there is a bee's nest of helicopters almost every day.
Yep.
So we're going to dig into this. Again, we've got a lot of expertise here, and we're going to dig into this, and we can't do it all in an hour, guaranteed. But we'll try to get to any questions that we can. We'd like to promote people up to panelists if periodically, so that you can actually interact with us in our panel on the questions. I think it's a neat feature. So give us a couple minutes to talk a little bit, and then we'll get to some questions, and maybe about every 15 minutes. All right. So let's roll into this. I'm going to kick it off with a story that we saw come out yesterday, the day before. It's about the Lilium infrastructure project down in Orlando, Florida. They're the first ones to be building a standalone vertiport operation, although it's adjacent to Orlando McCoy Airport. Let's talk about that. Who wants to weigh in on what that infrastructure's benefit is? Where do we see it going? How do we see it applying to this airspace? Have at it.
Peter's got a smile, so
Keep it short, Peter. I know you can talk a lot. Keep it short.
Yeah, I will keep it short. Lilium aspires not just to be an aircraft maker, but also an operator. But the company was founded and has been grown by people who've never operated small aircraft for revenue. And it's clear to me, who has done that they have no freaking clue. And so what they're doing, and I'll tell you the problem. People are excited about flying cars because they think it's going to free them from congestion. And when you unpack that, what they really want is they want to walk out their front door, get in a flying vehicle, and float away. Lilium's building things at airports. We have airports. People don't like going to airports. They're excited about not having to go to airports. So why are you putting them at airports? This model
that's where the planes are?
That's what the planes are. This model was attempted starting in the early mid-2000s with the air taxi movement. You guys probably remember. Air taxis were going to fill the skies with aluminum and carbon fiber. Cirrus SR-22s, I personally have sold the Lilium business model in my prior life with an aircraft that was twice as fast, cost less, and operated from already built infrastructure, namely reliever airports. And you can't make money at it. So I'm here to say with the voice of experience that they're doomed. So I'll put that out there.
All right. Your prediction is now recorded for all perpetuity.
Exactly. Yeah.
Ralph, what do you think?
Well, you know, what's interesting in the New York area is how this is going to change the dynamics of New York. You know, how many people were there, right? How many people were traveling? I mean, a trip, you know, vehicle trip, a car trip to JFK would take you sometimes an hour and a half, depending on traffic.
Day and a half.
So some of that made sense, right? You know, you think traveling, and from a helicopter standpoint, it seemed to make sense. But with the pandemic and the changes from there, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I've spoken to people who've been around New York for a very long time, and they feel that it's going to change forever. It will be completely different. You know, people are not going to have to go in the office. I mean, we've proven in the Port Authority that you could work from home and still be productive. In fact, I think we're actually more productive.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, because first, I'm not traveling. I actually do spend more time on the computer than I would if I was actually going into the city. And I can't tell you how many phone calls I was on today. I mean, there was 7 or 8 different phone calls back to back to back. If I was in the office, I probably could not do that. So it will be interesting to see how it moves forward if we do go back to the normal New York vibe, I'll say. You know, I think they have a concept that could work in New York because a lot of people do travel to the airports. You know, we were setting passenger records year after year for the last 6 or 7 years. We were setting records. So people do want to go to the airports. Most of them do come from Manhattan. So there is a potential there, but you know, yeah, I think you would have to expand beyond that to really make money.
Yeah, there's an operating model right now. Blade and Uber are running those shuttles back and forth from West 30th Street and from probably Wall Street. I know that they're subsidized, and I know that they're heavily subsidized. And there are issues originally with profitability and filling seats, because helicopters cost money to fly. And they don't own the helicopters. So they're getting them from other people who own the helicopters, and they're paying a certain rate. So without getting into all the details of the economics on it, it's tough business. If you don't fill seats, although Blade came up with a model with the filling the seats ahead of time effectively, or at least paying for the helicopter ahead of time. The fact of the matter is, as Peter knows, it's a tough industry, heavily cyclical. Things change with the wind, literally.
Yeah.
But fact of the matter is, I think Ralph might be right. There's definitely a need for airport transfer, but I'm not sure it applies to all areas. New York's sort of unique in that Manhattan sits on a peninsula, effectively an island, right? But and the airports are really diverse across the region, where you can't get from one to the other relatively simply. So if you're in New Jersey, you generally don't want to fly out of Kennedy, and if you're on Long Island, you generally don't want to fly out of Newark. But Kennedy and Newark offer different offerings, different routes, different carriers. Kennedy with a big international component, much more so than Newark, even though you can get internationally, you can get to places from Newark, it's mostly on United versus the cornucopia of carriers you have over there at Kennedy. So there's an argument to be made about both of those models. But Peter's point about decentralized infrastructure for regional travel with vehicles like he's building is probably valid also. I mean, you have people don't want to go to airports in this COVID environment, right? I mean, I didn't want to go to the airport before that. When I was traveling around the country for 6 years,
Right.
The airport sucked. I mean, I bought a United Airlines pass because I just go early and sit and eat breakfast for like 3 hours and to beat the traffic and get through TSA and just wait for my flight. It was a whole day experience. Whereas I think the decentralized infrastructure could possibly cut a lot of that downtime out, which makes it very valuable, right? So
yeah. Well, here's I'm full of facts, right? Because I'm a numbers guy. So it turns out that worldwide now, the revenue that airports take in is more than double the ticket fares for airline travel. So think about that for a minute. They've got you it's not about air travel anymore. When you're in the airport, it's a hostage situation. They've got you.
Yeah.
And you will spend money. You'll show up 3 hours early and buy food there in order to alleviate some of the misery. So the incentives are all backwards, right? The airlines want to give you really crappy basic service so that you'll pay personal money out of your own pocket to upgrade to have a less miserable service. Your boss, your CFO will expense the base fare. The thing about UAM is that the airlines have settled into this horrible service situation that's profitable, and the airports are aiding and abetting. Sorry, Ralph, but Port Authority is part of the problem here. You're making money off the misery of people. Like, you trap people and then you extract the cash out of them. So, one of the great things about UAM is the promise to disrupt that, right? That's what we're going after. But more broadly, if you can get people flying in like a Joby aircraft or a Lilium aircraft between New York and Philly, and they can do that from a distributed infrastructure where they don't have to go to a centralized airport, wait in line, TSA, all that. That's going to be a real win for people, right? The question is, who can afford it and how many of them are there?
Right.
That's the question.
right, location of infrastructure is going to be key. And I know there are some firms that work right now looking at dispersion of income around and for locating these things. Real quickly though, I checked through our attendees and made sure there were no airline people on that were going to try to trash us after the fact, because you just totally trashed the airlines, man. Beat them up pretty good. I mean, I think Ralph made a phone call there because they might be coming to your house. The Port Authority might be sending something. And you don't want to mess with them, So, and you have to get there. So you have to understand their economic model. The Port Authority, they don't make money from the airports. They just raise the tolls on the bridges, and that's how they make all their money.
Right.
Oh yeah. Well, here's a question I have for you, Ralph. When they, when these people come to talk to you about, hey, we want to do UAM, what kind of landing fees are you guys thinking of charging? And before you answer, let me just say, I have looked at everybody else's models, and never once have I seen a landing fee modeled into their pricing.
Well, they
I'm
don't.
like, you think the Port Authority is going to let me land for free?
Of course not. It depends. The current model with helicopters, we worked through the FBO for that.
Yeah.
Most of the UAMs, they don't want to land airside. They want to land on land side. Okay, and give people access to, let's say, AirTrain, or even, in the case of Uber, the way it worked, that they would land at the airport, there would be a vehicle waiting for them and take them to the terminal.
Yeah.
Which again, I don't know how they made money. I don't believe Uber really was running this helicopter operation to make money. It was more to test the future.
I can guarantee you they did not make money.
No, there was no way. Just looking at the way it was, I think they were just looking to see if there's a market for it, and
Yeah.
there actually was, right? The price I think was down to it was down to 300 a seat, something along those lines, maybe even 200.
There was surge pricing. It was in the 200s, depending on when you bought and everything.
And it was a pretty distinct market. It was between like 2 and 6 p.m. were like the real peak times. But again, we had, record passengers, and, the demand was there. Now we don't have that. How is that going to affect the recovery of New York?
Yeah.
Right now we're talking about 2023, 2024 to see normal traffic again. Let's say levels of 2019. And we've experienced this before. 9/11 was one, 2008 was another. It does take time, but it typically does recover, and usually busier than it was in those other times.
We're bumping up against capacity though, Ralph. Last summer, we banged our head on the ceiling a couple times from a capacity standpoint.
Oh, yeah.
And Ray, what was the limiting factor? Was it one particular piece of airspace? Was it runway capacity? What was it?
Pavement.
Pavement?
Only so much room to park a plane, right?
Well, it's also lack of procedures. We have recommendations for certain procedures. Newark was really impacted by really 1 hour of the day, really set the tone for the rest of the evening.
Mm-hmm.
And we tried to explain that to the airlines that, you have to look differently at this 1 hour, because you're really hurting the rest of the day. If you balanced it out a little bit better, and they started to do that. In fact, the original schedule for 2020 was much different than 2019, but we all know what happened with that.
Was that like around 6 p.m., Ralph, or
No, actually 2 p.m. was the start of it.
2 p.m.?
It was typically over capacity, unless we developed a few new procedures. If we had those procedures, we could have handled the volume.
We can talk about that.
I tried to explain that. Typically 2 p.m. is where the internationals come in, right? They come in around, I guess they start around 11, and they come in between 11 and 2.
I see.
And then you start adding in the domestic flights, and 2 p.m. and even today 2 p.m. is pretty busy, right?
Yeah.
With the slow time, 2 p.m. is still a
If
busy.
you consider 40% of our traffic, previous traffic busy, yeah, it's busy.
If you look at the rest of the day, it's pretty busy. Kennedy is the same way. Kennedy has followed the same kind of concept. Kennedy has a little bit more capacity, but that was a big issue for us. And we tried to push and say, balance this hour. Don't slot restrict the airport, because that's another factor. LaGuardia is slot restricted. Kennedy slot restricted. Newark was slot restricted, but was taken off last year, or was it 20?
It was a couple of years ago.
Actually, the end of 2016.
Yep, that's right. But I have to give FAA credit. They did a real nice job in managing the schedule, better than my expectations were, because I was still over there doing some of that stuff at that time. And I was up in arms about it. Had my conversations with United. and some other people about that. But they did a pretty nice job. I give the FAA credit. They kept to their word that they cap us at about 83 an hour, and it all worked out pretty well. And we're getting a little off topic with that, but what it comes down to is, like Ralph said earlier, is we have to find a way to fit this expanding low altitude market that's going to be hopping around all over this airspace. We have to fit it in with the existing flows of traffic. And then, of course, that right behind Peter there, you've got that's an SFRA through there below 1,300 feet of uncontrolled airspace effectively. And that's where you're going to be operating. So how do you manage, volumes of traffic in that airspace, with the current rules and procedures that we have, the current level of technology that we have? And if you do want air traffic services in that airspace, which we do provide now for noise abatement services for the city of New York, I mean, it's a giant mess. That corridor is like a mile wide and maybe 8 miles long, and we'll jam 15 or 20 helicopters into it at the same altitude and try to separate them all. I mean, it's not an easy puzzle.
Let me back up for a second here too. So Lilium's going to open this vertiport in Orlando. My first question is why that area? What's the draw? And the other one would be the proof of concept. If there's a failure there, what's the public perception going to be for this technology that we want to, push forward and integrate into the airspace that we're familiar with up here? How's that going to work? What's it going to look like? Can we take what's happening down there in Orlando and bring it here to the New Jersey, New York area and make it successful here?
Well, I will say, having flown around Orlando a little bit, that the airspace down there is actually really complex. You've got Titusville off to the east and, Kennedy Space Center. And there's a lot of airports. Like, I was trying to find a legal place to fly aerobatics, and I have to be more than 4 miles off a federal airway outside the limits of some controlled airspace. There's like no place. So there's a lot of airways, there's a lot of traffic from all those airports. So from a complexity standpoint, it's certainly not New York, New Jersey, but I think it's a fairly reasonable place to start putting your toe in the water to experience integrating with the national airspace system. I mean, that's what I felt as a pilot. What do you guys think as controllers?
So what we were thinking as far as the Ultra mission goes, we have a lot of underutilized airspace down here. Would it be easier to test some kind of technology here first and then, transport it right up to New York, New Jersey, the more populated airspace that we're already familiar with? The proof of concept in one part of the state, and transport it to, the northern part could be beneficial for our economy here.
Oh, absolutely. FAA has this concept of crawl, walk, run. So unlike the exciting pronouncements from aircraft manufacturers, they're, I think, going, oh boy, there's a lot of issues to deal with here. So if you guys want to start flying, you can start flying in like this corner of Wyoming, southern New Jersey over Cranberry Bog,
Yep.
but nowhere near people. To get started.
I take a different view of it. See, I look at it as if you can make it in New York, you make it anywhere, right?
A song about that?
It's challenging, but if you involve the right people, you can do anything in this airspace. You just have to involve the right people.
That's the truth. I mean, you really have to engage all the stakeholders. It doesn't work unless you do it that way.
Right. And that's the way to be successful here.
Well, Ray's made that point a couple of times there, where you test something out in Montana, Wyoming. The proof of concept isn't going to work here. This is the real world. Bring it here.
Well,
let us help you out.
So my big criticism of the Lilium announcement, as I mentioned, is that it's really no different from flying fixed wing aircraft from airports at that point. And you deal with the business problem is there's thin demand on the far end of each leg. So you can't fill the aircraft, and then your prices go up by a factor of 4, and then you're no longer interested. But what I was curious about, I mean, Ron, you've actually flown in this airspace. So, what's it like with the current or pre-COVID levels of traffic to be a rotor wing pilot trying to navigate?
It's busy, head on a swivel, especially over by what's over your shoulders there, you and Ralph. A lot of airplanes, maybe not so much now. I've been out of the game for a little bit, but it was pretty busy. You had a lot of tour operators up there, some new entrants coming in from the Jersey side over the Kearney heliport. But you had years up and down the Hudson. for somebody to come in and try to understand what the airspace is like, they really need to get a good look at who's already operating here and get a realistic picture of how you're gonna integrate. You're not reinventing the wheel. You're a new entrant into this airspace here. So, talk to some of the people who are already operating here and get a good idea of what your daily routine looks like. Some hours are going to be busier than less. Like what Ralph was saying with the airlines. If you're going to be taking off from an airport, you don't want to make these guys mad at you because you're taking off and landing at the FBOs. You want to bring all the partners to the table and understand what it is you're trying to do in this atmosphere here, this environment.
Yeah. So how many helicopter operations are going on or were pre-COVID? All right, let's make all pre-COVID.
So
Pre-COVID, how many helicopter operations are going on in that airspace on a daily basis?
right behind you, over your shoulder there, our Class Bravo airspace position, which controls anything above 1,300 to 2,000 feet in there, which is a very slim piece of airspace. We were working upwards of 90 operations an hour in that airspace, and that's just controlled operations. We were doing 600-700 a day, 800 a day sometimes in that airspace, 90,000 a year, 100,000 a year. And that doesn't count our IFRs, right? So, I mean, that's tacked on to the workload. We had a single position in the back of the control tower cab that worked all that with a single person. And it was busier than a lot of air traffic control facilities in the country, that one position back there.
Just for helicopters, right?
Yeah, just helicopters and fixed wings, basically between 1,300 and 2,000 feet in that airspace.
So that's kind of unique in this area too, that there's a dedicated controller just for low-level helicopter operations. And some fixed wing may mix in there with the, getting into the exclusion, but not too many. I don't know, maybe Ray and Ralph, you guys could probably talk to it more intelligently than me. But how many towers have a helicopter operator dedicated to that traffic alone? And now, if you think, mixing in some of the VTOL aircraft that want to come into the environment there, what's that going to look like, right? Is there going to be sector controllers?
Well, it's supposed to be all automated, right? That's the theory.
Okay. Next question.
Right. So let me tell you the fundamental flaw with automation in my view. Fundamental flaw of automation is, we've got data from aircraft accidents, but we don't have any data from aircraft accidents that were avoided because the controllers knew how to talk to each other and the controllers and the pilots knew how to talk to each other, right? Or even the pilots, if you've got two helicopters approaching a heliport, the pilots knowing how to coordinate, right? When something dangerous was developing and pilot action resolved it or controller action resolved it, that's not recorded anywhere. So how do you train the AI how to do that?
You can't capture benefits on things that don't actually cause problems. It's just, you're right. I tried to do this with a program that I deployed for FAA. We tried to capture the time savings and the error savings benefits. You couldn't capture it because they just didn't happen, right? Because
Right.
you can't capture what negative benefits, whatever it comes down to. But it's very interesting. You're right. You don't know what the benefit is. You can't quantify it in any way, shape, or form, but it's there. Qualitatively, you can see it.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just thinking from a pure programming perspective, there's been lots of times when I've been in a busy pattern somewhere and just based on situational awareness and listening to what's going on, I was able to maneuver to avoid what would have otherwise been a dangerous situation. But it was kind of like, it was social knowledge. It wasn't just physics. It wasn't just detecting other aircraft knowing. It's like, I know that they just called a right 360 for a student pilot in front of me and they forgot I'm coming down the downwind towards him. And, so I speak up and say, do you want me to do a right 360? And they're like, oh yeah. Right. And how do you train them? That's because the volume that Uber's talking about, can we just talk about Uber's giant vision? Uber's giant vision for eVTOL is that people won't even buy cars anymore because it'll be so ubiquitous and so cheap that you'll just go get in your flying eVTOL and Uber your way to wherever you want to go. And the ConOps from the FAA is all that traffic's going to be squished between 600 and 800 feet. So how tall is the Freedom Tower? I mean, is it 1,400 feet?
It's 1,776 feet tall.
1776, of course, duh. So all of that traffic's going to be at the height of like Ralph's eyes.
Yeah, pretty much.
We're gonna put all that traffic over Manhattan at the height of Ralph's eyes, so much that people don't have to buy cars anymore, and it's all going to be automated. And none of it's going to conflict with the existing fixed wing flow, right?
And mix in package delivery too.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
We haven't even
exactly.
touched on that.
Guys, I want to get to a question that we've had a couple of questions out there. I want to promote Alex Scary up to be able to talk with us here. Alex had a couple of questions. Alex, I'm going to pop you up on the screen here. Let me know if you can hear me. Okay, it looks like you're muted.
Yeah, can you hear you now?
Yeah, I can hear
Yep.
you.
Good.
Hey, welcome to
Hello,
the
I mean,
happy hour.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Well, my first question would be about the VFR days, non-VFR days in Manhattan. How many would you estimate you would have in a year?
VFR days. Well, we're lucky enough that I think the percentage is it's probably close to 90% is VFR. We don't have a tremendous amount of IFR days, but so overall, we're pretty good with that. I mean, I'm talking basic VFR 1003 over.
Right. There are marginal days from a helicopter perspective where you're 600, 700, 800 feet. You're IFR technically, but helicopters still fly around. How many Cat 1 and below? Where you get to 200 feet and a half mile. That's very, very small amount. Maybe what, 0.5% or something. It's very not even. It's probably 5 days a year that we're below Cat 1 mins at Newark Airport. So you're pretty much operating 95% of the time in characteristics where you could fly helicopters around.
Right, and it happens in the spring and the fall, typically. That's your normal operation.
Yep.
I'm not talking about snow events and that type of thing, but typically strictly weather and
Seasonal
fall
change. Yep.
is seasonal changes.
Yeah,
And the
but
other question
interestingly-
I would have.
Oh,
is
Alex,
there,
sorry, let me jump in real quick.
sorry about that. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I was just saying, I sold trips between Boston and New York on Cirruses, among other aircraft. And Cirruses, among light G aircraft, are one of the few that are certified for flight into known icing. And I will tell you that not having FICI capability reduces your dispatch rates by about 20%, maybe more, in the Northeast. Because there are enough days where even if the airfields aren't IFR, that there's icing in your en route that it becomes a real issue. So anyway, just want to share that part.
Actually,
Yeah,
Alex is from Dubai also, by the way, guys. So it's like
They don't have icing.
No, but I mean, I fly into, I used to fly into JFK very regularly, so I do have an idea of what you guys have to face up in the winter.
And you had a question about rooftop helipads also?
Yes, I mean, when I'm in Manhattan, I sometimes see helicopters going up across. I mean, would they be just crossing the city, or are there actually any rooftop ops happening?
There's no rooftop landings in New York. In New Jersey, you can, but not in New York City. There's only 3 helipads in New York City that you can land a helicopter on. But after what was it? The Eastern Airlines had that crash in New York.
Yeah, on the Pan Am building.
Pan Am building, yeah.
That was,
Pan Am.
that plus even the most recent accidents have put a damper on that. Helicopters are not very popular in New York as far as from a public view standpoint. Between noise, noise has been a big issue for us. And there was a noticeable increase in noise complaints, even with the Uber and the Blade activity.
I saw an article today about that actually on LinkedIn. I think it came through my LinkedIn feed and they were saying that complaints were up this year, October to October. And I was thinking to myself, how are complaints up? Because there's only like 4 tour helicopters flying around versus 15 this year, and they're all Nion. And I don't know how complaints are up personally. I mean, we don't even.
People are home.
Yeah, it's
people
quiet
are home
now.
instead of. Yeah,
They're
home. They're not at work. Yeah,
that could be
but
it.
No, one of my credentials, Ray, was that I founded a nonprofit here in the Boston area called the American Free Skies Association, and it was a 501c3 that was dedicated to building bridges between people in the community who were concerned about aircraft noise and local pilots. Try and get more discussion going and find ways for ultimately what was helpful about it was it helped educate pilots to fly more friendly and less noisy. But I'll tell you, as a pilot, I went and visited people who had noise complaints and would sit there, and we had a meeting with. There was a town organization that was anti-noise, anti-aircraft noise. And, we're having a discussion like this, sitting around on one of their porches, and they're like, "There it is. Do you hear it?" And I was like, "What?" Like, "Oh, it's up there. It was a 172 at 2,000 feet going by, and for people who aren't pilots, I mean, you could tell it was flying, but a leaf blower a block away is way louder."
Wait till the delivery comes into the neighborhoods.
Well, so the thing is, what I learned was if you don't like something, the noise is really salient, it's really noticeable to you. Whereas if you get a benefit from it, then you don't mind. So the delivery drones are going to annoy the people who aren't getting the delivery, but if you've got the package coming, you're happy.
We're going to see how that all plays out. And honestly, let's talk about this because it really doesn't. It's UAM is going to drive for as much as the vehicles are quiet or allegedly quieter, right? We've got different technologies. And talking to Ron and his knowledge of helicopters and other people that I know, that have flown them, taking the mechanical, the turbines out and some other things have really kind of quieted things down, or would quiet things down to some extent. Fact of the matter is, though, if you've got 10 helicopters now making noise and then 1,000 eVTOLs making noise, you still got noise. And you have noise, you have visual pollution, and you have all kinds of things that the community, especially in New York City, are going to lose their minds over, right? We know this, right? We've dealt with it. Ralph and I worked on a project trying to build a new approach into the airport in Newark. Right, Ralph, the GPS, the 29?
Yep.
You're on that 29?
Yep.
How many years does that take because of environmental? Like
Oh.
8 years?
Yeah, it was incredible. And it was over, most of it was over water.
We built it over water, right? We built it over water,
Yeah.
and it took us 8 years. Right now it works. I think we did a good job. Some people
Yeah.
don't think we did.
Yeah. I mean, that's real, right? People have real concerns.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's crazy, right? So you're going to have all these community issues to deal with. So yeah, I mean, how fast can you really ramp these things up? How fast can you scale them without running up against the community activism and the political pushback that you're going to get, right? Especially in a town like New York, a city like New York, or northern New Jersey, or possibly even Boston, right? I don't know how unfriendly your communities are toward the airport in Boston, but I assume that there's got to be some pushback in local communities.
I think Peter nailed it. You know what? My package is more important to me than your package to you. It's all perception. If it's going to benefit me, I don't mind.
Yeah, well, and Ron, that research backs that up. But first, Uber Elevate, and props to Uber for bringing together real world experts on this stuff and highlighting what the issues are, because they did a great job of that. There was a really good research panel of academic researchers who investigate aircraft noise and the effect on communities. And there's a standard technique for taking a volume of noise and a characteristic of noise and turning it into how annoying that will be to people. But then they found this unexpected variance about how annoying it was. And there was this great study up in the North Sea, up in Scotland. And, there were all this helicopter traffic going back and forth to the oil rigs. And that was by far the most hated sound by everybody except people whose family worked on the oil rigs.
Mhm.
And they didn't mind it at all.
That's money.
It's money. So the key is, if the noise benefits you, you don't mind.
That's really interesting. I've never heard it put that way. But yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense from a human nature standpoint.
It does. Yeah.
So we'll see what the frictions are when you start to, when these things start to roll out, when Peter certificates his vehicle and starts to fly it. And we're going to, hopefully that's going to be soon, right, Peter? We're going to get that done. Get to work.
5 years.
You're talking to us. You should be working on that.
I know.
You shouldn't be drinking on duty, man. I'm just telling you.
I'm off duty.
You're off
So
duty.
I'm on punch duty.
I'm
I'm on punch
the
duty.
boss. They don't let you off duty. Come on.
Do you know where all the noise from a helicopter comes from?
The pilot's fear that the parts are going to fly all apart.
Actually, the tail rotor. The tail rotor is that's the noise you hear. And the easy way for people to understand it, when you hear a Coast Guard helicopter go overhead, they have a Fenestron tail, has a completely different sound. So that's
Yep.
where the majority of the noise from helicopters come from, the tail rotor, believe it or not.
That's
Don't put that
interesting.
in interesting sound.
Yeah, it's speeding a lot faster than the main rotor. The main rotor is, you hear the Chinooks with the,
Yeah.
the two mains, that significant sound, but the high pitched whine comes from the tail rotor.
Well, you got the penetrating sound, like, on a large rotor aircraft where the tips of the rotors are going faster than the speed of sound. You've got
Yep.
that chop, which I think maybe permeates more than the high frequency tail rotor. I'm no acoustic scientist by any means, but
Well, so it's interesting you say that, because certainly I've got a video now of one of our prototypes flying behind me. And that's a 54.9 pound UAS. And it
0.9.
nice job.
0.99, it has a tail fan, so it's 90 degrees rotated from a helicopter tail rotor. It points up and down, but it's the noisiest thing on that aircraft, no doubt. And it's a lot smaller than the mains.
Mhm.
The other thing, to Ray's point is, I've gotten some education on this, and there's a technical term for the noise that helicopter main rotor blades make as they spin around and they smack into the vortices that the other blade has created. And it's called wop wop.
Right.
That's the technical term for it.
Technical, huh?
Like the old, Korean warrior and two-bladed.
Where are you going with that, Ralph?
And WAP, but the thing about WAP WAP is it's low frequency and it penetrates, it's conducted well by building structure. So you can't soundproof against it. So one of the big advantages of the UAM aircraft is that you will be able to soundproof against it. You'll be able to put thicker glass in and other sound baffles, and it won't transmit the noise as well.
I saw an
So there's-
interesting article about, somebody put it out, I forget who it was. They were talking about sound barriers around landing areas where it would maybe capture some of that sound, acoustically baffle that sound. Because as you know, when you transition into ground effect and such, you've got more sound, obviously, your higher power setting maybe. So, that could be part of any infrastructure that's built, if it actually works, if the science works, to help mitigate some of that wop wop that comes about from whatever your main rotor assembly looks like, right? Like on your
Yeah,
aircraft.
no, I think that's a good idea and likely to happen. But it raised an interesting question, which is another question for Ron, which is, how do you like maneuvering down low next to buildings and walls? Like, would you want to land in a sort of three-sided box?
There was a Hackensack Medical Center had a pad that was down inside. When I say inside, it was surrounded on three sides. Once you're committed to landing, that was it. You make a mistake, it's going to be a bad day for you. It sucked. There's no other way to say it. Open is better, three-sided surrounded. You have a wall, that's fine. East 34th has that, the highway. What's the main highway that goes through there? You make a mistake, you're gonna bump into the wall. But the open is better. Trying to fit something, an air vehicle into an area that is confined. That's a high workload, and it really is a risk that if you don't need to do it, why are you doing it, right? Don't put pads where you're going to make the workload really high. If you have an equipment failure, everybody else on board is going to have a bad day as well, right? So
What about rooftops? Have you landed on rooftops?
Oh yeah, yep, plenty. Yep, hospitals pretty much have the rooftop landing pads.
What's that like when it's windy?
It can be a handful. Some days are better than others, but you get the vortices effect around certain wind. The buildings. The more packed in that city is. Atlantic City was a good one there. If you had a nice stiff breeze off the wrong side of the building, you come in, nice stabilized approach, and all of a sudden at the end you get the winds whipping around the building. It can be a little interesting, but.
And you flew a pretty powerful helicopter. You flew the 139, right? So that's 46-foot rotor diameter.
Go back to the 76B model, which
yeah.
I mean, it had all kinds of power. I mean, ET6B engines in that thing, and then the 139 that came on after that one, plenty of power. But even still, you're dancing on the pedals, making sure you're not keeping everything nice and stabilized. So I guess the last 30 feet could be a little interesting for people in the back of if it was a windy day.
Ralph, what do you think about that? You're looking at the biggest infrastructure players in the whole area. What do you think about that?
I don't see us, operating on buildings again. If anything, it would be on a perimeter. If there happened to be a building near the water, I think that's a possibility. But once you start talking about landing and departing in between buildings, I don't think the city will ever go for that again.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, it's just, there's been so much negativity around it. The positive is, I think, from a noise aspect, because there's been pretty much a war on helicopters in New York for many years now. And even as far as out as East Hampton, because all the people who go out on the weekends, tremendous amount of noise complaints there. This is something that I think, to Pete's point about, what are your goals just operating between Manhattan and the airports? To me, East Hampton is a perfect place to look towards to actually operate eVTOLs. If you can reduce the noise there, the people will be more than happy. I'm actually met the airport operator, airport manager, and he was interested as well. That eVTOLs could actually help his situation out, because it is pretty bad. They wanted to shut the airport down. There's been a lot of pressure to change things out in East Hampton, but so far they've been able to survive. But the pressure is going to continue every year.
Even with the helicopter routes that go out there, you have political pressure from influential senators that want to change established routes where people who have the money can, they want to fly to their house to the Hamptons and come to work in the city. There's been pressure. You could probably, maybe not, but.
Well, I was involved in the North Shore helicopter route many years ago, where we were mandated to come up with something, which we did, but then that just generates different problems in a different area, right? So the problems became more of a, New York City problem, because all the helicopters were flying over the same neighborhoods, right? So now we came up with another plan, or the FAA did, and now they've kind of split that route, which, in the short term will help. But again, that's going to, down the road, they're still going to generate complaints down the road. But no matter what you do, it's always going to be complaints. To Ray's point earlier about aircraft noise, I attend all the roundtables that we have for JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark, and Teterboro. And it was surprising to me that people were still complaining about aircraft noise at LaGuardia. LaGuardia is running like 20 to 30% of the traffic they were in 2019.
Yeah.
And they're still complaining about the flight paths. I mean, that's a tremendous reduction in flights. And yet people are still complaining about certain routes.
It's the perceived slight of the noise, right? So we all know that there's a psychological component to this whole thing. Now there's a lot of groups out there trying to overcome that. It's just going to take time, I think. And like Peter said, it's going to be benefit. The benefit's got to be there. If you're going to beat me up over the head with noise, then you better be giving me something for it. Is what it comes down to, right?
Yeah.
Hey, real quickly, we're running out of time. We can go longer if you guys want to, but we're supposed to wrap at 6. And Alex had a couple more questions. I still have him promoted to be able to talk. So Alex, if you want to throw him out there, go right ahead.
Good. I mean, it's very interesting what you're mentioning about the rooftop ops. That probably they would be not so popular. So keeping in mind that you have to land on the perimeter still of Manhattan, would you actually see the benefit of going airborne rather than going surface mode all the way and door to door?
A benefit from operating at a higher altitude instead of the surface, is that, am I understanding?
No. What I meant sort of, would it be worth putting in an airborne component if you have to land on the perimeter rather than taking a surface car all the way?
So getting crosstown sucks, right? So your market is immediately limited if you have to operate off the perimeter, because people in the middle might as well just get on the subway.
Exactly.
If you're talking about vehicle traffic, car traffic, I've driven into Manhattan many times, and there are days that it works well. And I'm going pre-COVID. There are days that you could get out of Manhattan within 10 minutes. And then there are days it would take you an hour just to get off Manhattan. So that's really the problem. It's more of a predictable departure from your to the airport or anywhere you're going, actually. It's very unpredictable any time of the day. You know, typically coming into the city is okay because people come in varying times. But leaving, if you leave anywhere after 3 o'clock, 3 p.m., and again, this is pre-COVID, you're going to have a long trip. You know, I live about 12 miles from downtown Manhattan. And I drove into the city a few months ago to meet some friends. You think, you know, there's 10% of the people that work in Manhattan have returned, 10%. And it took me 90 minutes to go 12 miles.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, this is
my
why-
work experience is that I always seem to travel to New York when there's the UN General Assembly going on. And that means like there's like a 2-hour trip from JFK. So I would pray for veto whenever that was going on.
Yeah,
Good luck getting urban mobility during the UNGA.
Exactly. And then with all the temporary zones going on. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I think Carol had a question here, Earl. I actually had another one come up. Carol, did you had a question about, isn't Lilium here to just test their vehicles?
autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I thought too originally, but I guess they moved into the infrastructure space.
Well, guys, the way, I mean, being a vehicle developer who has to create buzz around what we're doing, I read that as really, I mean, that it's fundamentally just a PR play, right? They got a big developer to say, yeah, you know, we'll build 30,000 homes, and one of the features will be Lilium service. So they're years and years and years away from entry into service and building 30,000 homes. So who knows what'll happen between now and then. So I wouldn't put too much stock on that, other than it's an interesting case to consider. You know, I've already trashed it, but it is an interesting case to consider as to whether it could make a valuable service. Now, you know, we have one example in New York City of people paying for a RotorWing service privately, and that's airport transfer. And this is even prior to Blade and Uber subsidizing. And by the way, Blade's subsidy really came from Airbus, in case people weren't paying attention. So it's really Airbus versus Uber. Airbus has aligned itself versus Uber as the two titans of trying to foment the whole ecosystem around this. I did some numbers, and it might surprise people to know that if you were going to run airport transfer between the Wall Street heliport and JFK, and you could fill 80% of your seats regularly, that your one-way ticket price on an AW139, like the one Ron flew, is $181. And that's if you can fill 80% of all the seats on an AW139, of which there's a bunch. And to do it on a Volocopter would be autonomously $228. And if you have to put a pilot in there, it's over $500 one way. Now, to put that in perspective, like Nion will quote you like $1,400 for that trip, right? That was their list price, if I remember correctly. So there is a market of wealthy people in Manhattan who were paying that, but you know, the real issue is how big is that market? You know, they went from, I think Ralph, you said they went up to 600 or 700 operations a month, was it? With the shuttles?
Yeah.
So you divide that by.
U.S. helicopters tried to get into that at one time.
Yeah, exactly.
They were the first ones.
Okay. So, you know, the thing that kills you is not really the operating economics of the aircraft. It's, can you fill all the seats?
Right.
And there's there's a guy up, and then baggage. Yeah, none of these aircraft, Lilium will take 4 people with no baggage.
Right. So these numbers are great, but travelers have suitcases and helicopters have limitations, and I'm sure these urban mobility aircraft do as well. So the seat price might be valuable at a low cost, but that's just you.
Well, yeah, and what I'm saying is these aren't low costs. I mean, an Uber Black between Wall Street and JFK is going to cost you around $100, maybe $120, and we're talking multiples of it. And
half of that is tolls from the Port Authority, by the way.
Well, by the way, I put in, just so Ralph knows, I put in $100 landing fee into this model I built.
That's cheap. Landing fees,
That's what I thought.
landing fees at Wall Street Heliport are much more than that.
Wow.
Yeah, I heard 185 for a small craft and more for
Yeah,
bigger.
yeah, easy. Yeah, that's a big deal. If you're looking at, having to have a pilot on board, which a lot of these numbers are not based upon, right? They're autonomous numbers, and then they don't calculate in landing fees. I mean, if you're flying a 4-seat aircraft, you got to factor those two things in. You might as well add $200 or $300 a ticket.
We are not anywhere close to being pilotless. The public has not even accepted this yet. We don't have home delivery, and that's going to be autonomous, right? So,
Yeah.
baby steps.
Baby steps. Well, that's what I love about Ultra is that it's grounded in the reality of the drone industry, right? Part 107 world, and people who are actually using rotorcraft to make money and solve real problems. They happen to be small scale, but it's reality, right? And so I think that's part of expanding on the learnings there into this UAM world is really important. And we don't even really, if you can't autonomously deliver a package in the middle of the night, how are you going to autonomously deliver people to JFK?
Right.
At 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
So 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? In the afternoon push.
While giving Port Authority their cut.
I'm giving the Port Authority their cut and making sure you're not irritating too many anti-noise.
We call that the
and
VIG, by the way. The Port Authority gets VIG. That's just how it works.
It's a big, yeah.
Yeah, you're on the accents here, right? We talked about that earlier. Hey, we're the good fellas, right?
Guys, we're at 6 o'clock. I'm willing to stay on longer. If you can, you let me know what you want to do. We still have an audience. We have a fair amount of people still on. I'm not sure who's going to stick around, but we've got, more to talk about if you like.
I can hang for a while longer.
I can hang.
Good, Ralph, Ron?
Yeah, if somebody wants to chime in, let's hear from some spectators there.
Well,
I have to get another ice cube.
do this. I forgot to say what I was drinking. I have you can't see this with the light, but it's the Lagavulin 16 Scotch. You ever have this one?
Ooh,
I have not.
ooh, that sounds good.
It's outstanding, and I have it in a Glenmorangie glass. Which you can see that Glenmorangie. That's how you're supposed to pronounce it. Yeah, and one more shout out real quick again to Ron Leach for sponsoring this, Leach Strategic Partners. Looks like a couple people are cutting out, but if you guys want to stay and chat a little more, we definitely can. People are chiming in on the Lagavulin. It is good stuff.
Oh, Wasim Naqvi is one of our attendees. Wasim's in charge of unmanned aerial systems for Raytheon. So I've outed you, Wasim.
Well, let's get him on here. Wasim, you want to talk? Come on in.
Yeah, I'm sure he has a lot of know-how about these kinds of aircraft.
Wasim, you're on. You're live. You're live on
Hey,
the Ultra.
how are you guys? Hey, this has been a great discussion, but I'm ready for the Lagavulin, that's for sure.
Well,
Yeah.
we haven't figured out how to send it through the computer yet, but once we do that, I'll send you some.
Oh man, now you're cooking with
Well,
gas, cooking with gas. Hey, so my question. So this is all really good, and I get the crawl, walk, run, right? So let's make it happen. So what do you think about the infrastructure that's going to be required to make this happen? Because my view is, everything that we do today has been based on traveling from one city to another, right? And now we're talking about intercity and interregions. So all our infrastructure has been established for one city to another. And now if we're doing this lower, this intra-region capability or intercity, what do we need to make it happen? And I do agree that at the beginning, the existing infrastructure will work because there'll only be like 3 aircraft. But what happens downstream?
Well, Ralph, what do you guys think?
Sure, I'm not
Maybe
even.
I've had the scotch already. There you go.
I'm not even sure if the existing infrastructure would handle even the 3 aircraft.
Yeah.
None of these helipads are really designed for really high volume operations. We were struggling with JFK a little bit. We met with air traffic. It was okay. It was manageable, but we were approaching a point where we were limiting ourselves with space. The FBO wasn't designed to have 700 operations a month. Right. So you know, we are seriously looking at that. What do we need from an infrastructure, especially for eVTOL, right? We have to talk about electric, we have to talk about safety, where do we locate it? Do we use existing structures? You know, do we invest the money or do we lease a piece of property to an operator and let them build it? Because that's our typical model, right? You know, we own the land, we lease it out to an airline, let them spend the money they want to build a terminal or modernize the terminal. That's how we typically operate. If we were to build something, it's got to be a public use. So anybody that wants to come in and operate, we have to grant them access. But if we lease it to someone, then they can have exclusive use of that property. So there's a lot of,
They don't use AIP funds though, right, Ralph? If they use AIP funds, it has to be public use.
yes, correct.
Right. So, you know,
So
Well,
that's
here's-
really our dilemma. Do we invest in it? We know it's coming, right? You know, from my viewpoint, from my background, you know, let's put it, if we're going to do this, let's put it on a part of the airport that works best with the normal traffic flows. Let's not build something that's going to create a different problem down the road for us, because that just, you know, we're just hurting ourselves. You know, I mean, people want, you know, some of these operators want to land on terminal buildings. Well, that may sound great, but is that realistic? I
No,
can't have an airport like JFK that has, you know, 5 operating terminals. I can't really have 5 aircraft. You can, but the complexity of that is multiplied when I have 5 different departure points all going to the same route to try to get back.
right. It's coming over different, depending on the winds and configuration. You know, Kennedy's a tough one. Kennedy, you know, you're coming and going from all directions.
Right.
You know, Newark's a little simpler with that. Most of our traffic is north-south. But my mindset is that to support this industry going forward, you're going to need to build infrastructure at strategically located spots around the region that is going to serve the population that can afford the service the best. Because, you know, there are going to be, I think one of the questions was that how do you bring this service? How do you overcome that this is really a 1%er service, right? This is not ever going to be whatever Uber says. Maybe they're smarter than I am. They're probably smarter than I am, but it's not going to be a $20 thing. You're not going to hop in for $20 and fly to the city. Your landing fees alone are going to eat that up. Okay.
Yep.
So how do you strategically locate separate infrastructure that can support not only the operation, but the recharging, the passenger handling, everything you need to do in places that people are going to be able to use it. If you locate these things in areas that people still have to drive far to get to, at least your demographic that's going to use the service has to drive far to get to, take some more time to drive there than to take a flight. They're not going to do it. And you're competing,
Exactly.
especially in the New York area, you're competing against existing forms of transportation. You have mass transportation in this area. You've got a robust subway system, a robust train system, a robust network of highways, except when you get in within about 20 miles of New York City and it falls apart. But outside of 20 miles of New York City, you're pretty much okay driving around. So you're competing with all those different, the travel times and the economics, and you've really got to be very, very careful about where you locate, or you're going to have an underutilized piece of infrastructure you spend a lot of money on. So you need people who understand the area. And we like to say at Ultra that we understand the area because we're from here. You know, Ralph understands the area. Ron, we understand New York, New Jersey. We've been here for 30 years doing this stuff, right? But you bring in, Lilium thinks they're going to build in Florida something that is going to work in New York the same way. It's just not going to. So you really, you know, for as many people, I like to say the academics want to think that there's a one size fits all. Being around air traffic control for 30 years and different airports and different facilities, different operations, if you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. If you've seen one region, you've seen one region. Nothing translates directly anywhere else. The basic concepts do, but the local knowledge is really, really essential to building out a working network that is going to thrive.
Yeah.
So how how do you cycle these new aircraft into the system? Take a bow. So, right, helicopters avoid the flow of fixed wing, right, for the most part. How, you know, the regulations aren't even updated to consider how these aircraft are going to fit in. Are they going to be, okay, so 1,000 and below, right? But what's that going to look like? How are we going to cycle into a busy airport hub? Yeah, we all want to land at one spot, but, you know, leaving is going to be a different, you know.
No, Ron, nobody knows yet. I mean, there are concepts being batted around, but nobody knows because they don't pass the test Ray just put out.
Right.
You got to look at it from a system perspective, right? It's got to fit in with all the other stuff that's going on, and it has to do it economically, or nobody's going to buy it.
Fit in, I think, is a key word, like you said. It's, you know, don't take this technology, say, here, make it work. Incorporate some of the people who understand the environment for the regulatory, you know, positions that you're going to take on it.
So we looked at it from, you know, for us, Teterboro is the 1%ers, right?
Yep.
So if you want to operate from Teterboro to Manhattan, because that's a popular market. The other option is Stewart. Stewart is about 60 miles north of Manhattan.
I don't think Teterboro guys are going to like that up there, though.
It's a long drive from
You
Bergen
guys
County
keep
to
hoping
Stewart.
Stewart will be a thing. Stewart's not going to ever be a thing. I'm sorry.
Listen, I know that. I can tell you, when I first came into the Port Authority, I said, I don't know why we haven't bought Stewart. Stewart's never going to be. We've tried.
Yeah.
You know, the flights here.
Boston has Worcester. It's never going to be a thing. Stewart's never going to be a thing.
Stewart's a nice airport, though.
Oh, it's beautiful. Nobody wants to go there.
Ralph, it's funny though, even what you're talking about with Teterboro, right? Teterboro's on the southern end of Bergen County. I live in Bergen County. I'm probably 12, 13 miles north of Teterboro. I'm in like northwestern Bergen County. I don't even see people driving to Teterboro. You ever driven past the Route 417 merge at rush hour in the morning?
Yeah.
You ain't saving any time.
No, I used to do probably, I don't know, 20% of our business went in and out of Teterboro. And, you know, there's a great option. There is a bus that costs you like $5 and it gets to use the bus lane through the tunnel into Manhattan. For $5, you can get from Teterboro into Manhattan in like 30 minutes.
Mhm.
There's no other way to do that unless it's the middle of the night. So, you know, people would say, hey, we want a black car to take us in. And we're like, well, we can get you a black car. It'll cost you $150 and it'll take you 90 minutes. Or for $5, you can get on this bus. And the billionaires were getting on the bus.
After they bought the company.
Well, they might have bought the company, but you know, the point is that people care about getting their destination on time. They don't really care about how it happens. And they don't want to waste money doing it. So these notions that people are going to spend extra money to just because it's shorter flight. Well, you know, shorter, you know, look, time is not money, right? And the reason time is not money is that I can't get paid for that time. There's no market for that time that's saved. Nobody's paying me for it.
Right.
So if I can adjust my day and I can spend $5 instead of $150, most people will do that. So to
Let's
get
get a bus, right?
Yeah, take the bus.
Yeah, let's get a bus. Let's get an ultra bus.
Yeah, there's a luxury aspect to it. You have to throw the luxury aspect of into the equation. You have to look at, you know, are some of these trips into Manhattan and such, are they going to be for leisure, right? But that's not going to drive the large majority of your revenue. You've got to capture that traveler that's going for a purpose. He's got to be going from somewhere, you know, that can support it to somewhere where people really want to go. Like I don't personally see anybody running suburb to suburb in a UAM.
Tried it.
Just no,
Can't make money doing
what's that?
it. I've tried it. You can't make money doing it because
make
you're
money
empty
doing
coming back. You're empty coming back. So that immediately doubles whatever your ticket price is.
Right. Yeah. Empty legs kill you, you know, in this kind of a system. Right. So you've got to make sure that you're flying people both ways. You're flying people who want to go there. You want to have a service that's going to be pseudo scheduled or at least filled. You're filling most of your seats. Otherwise, I don't care how cheap your aircraft is, you're not going to make money. So that's a really big piece of this. So it's really the network function all falls down to really smartly placing your infrastructure, and your routes have to go to places where people want to go. You're not
No.
going to Aunt June's house out in Pennsylvania, in the middle of Pennsylvania on a UAM from Teterboro.
Nope.
Unless you're a
Not-
billionaire and you own.
Not
the-
unless you want to pay, $2,000 to do it. If you pay for both legs, yeah,
Right.
you could do that.
It's not in
that's
my
pure choice.
economic set to do that. It might be in Peter's. It's not. in mine,
No.
Okay.
I'm not in a hurry to spend that kind of money.
Right. And I don't think that many
yeah,
people
I'll
are.
drive.
So, but the key I think is, can you take the helicopter jet set, if you want to call it that? It's really not even the 1%. In New York area, the 1% can't afford to charter a
Yeah.
helicopter out to the Hamptons, right, Ralph? I mean, conceivably you could be in the 1% up here, you make good money, but you're not flying on Gulfstreams. It's the 1/10 of 1% that's really using that market. So how do you democratize it, if you want to call it that, down to maybe the top half of 1% or the top 1%, right? Because if you're talking about an area that has 15 million people in it, and you can generate the top 1%, well, you got a sizable market. But until you
Right.
can
Well,
knock that up.
so this is where I have to do a commercial for Transcend and what we're doing, which is not UAM, it's not eVTOL. I mean, this aircraft starts out with a jet engine and jet fuel, which we can replace with electric motors and batteries someday when they get powerful enough, but they're not there yet.
Mhm.
So all of this stuff is what we spent years figuring out and didn't launch the company until we thought we had an answer. Our answer is not to fly over cities, but to fly from city to city. And with an aircraft that can fly using the existing air traffic rules, all of the rules and mesh with it without disrupting the current flow. Although I still have research to do on that with y'all on how to make sure that happens. But the key is symmetrical demand. We can offer prices because we're going to fill the seats in both directions because we're targeting business travel on city to city routes. And that's a proven market today. I can go to the Bureau of Transportation Statistics and see how many people do that, right? So my goal is to alleviate the congestion at Teterboro and Newark and LaGuardia by siphoning off some of that business travel into our VTOL approach. That's ultimately what we want to do. And it hits on the why will people not be mad about the noise? Well, it's because now everybody can fly from Boston to Philly or Boston to DC cheaper than they currently can now, and it'll cut their travel time by 2/3 to 80%. So that's my Transcend pitch.
It's interesting.
and, despite
used to be a route structure. There used to be a network of routes 20 years ago out of Newark that flew ATR 72s. Ralph probably remembers this. And those guys would fly to get out of the New York area. They'd fly VFR.
Yeah.
Because they'd fly in and out VFR because they knew they weren't getting caught in the traffic management. Ralph was throwing out there those 15 trails on the routes. They weren't getting caught up on those, and they would come down. They would fly down the Hudson River, and we drop them into the airport, and everybody loved it. We loved it. We were pushing 110 airplanes an hour through an airport that probably shouldn't do any more than like 80, and
Right.
we were killing it. Everybody was happy. The pilots were having a great time because they were flying like teardrops and stuff like that and all kinds of great things. But it worked because aircraft performance supported it. And the weather, like Ralph said, 90% of the time, 95% of the time, you're okay to go VFR, right? So it's really, and those were all routes probably less than 250 miles, Ralph?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
it was
that's exactly.
200 miles.
200 miles.
That's exactly the market I'm going after, and those turboprops, you get really nice steep descents out of them. They push the props forward and you come right down, right? To get those slam dunk approaches in, mix them in with the traffic. So we'll be like that, but on steroids. And that's the goal. So, despite that, I'm still a supporter of eVTOL. I would love to be able to skip over traffic, at least for some part of my travel. I do agree electric's the future. So the real thing we're struggling with is how do you get there from here?
Yeah. And we always argued when United transitioned over to the Embraer 145 jets, they crushed the airport.
Yeah, definitely.
Right?
Oh, interesting.
Back in the
Huge.
heyday.
It was a huge impact to the airport.
Crazy.
Interesting.
Oh yeah, it was. We were running when what Ray was talking about. We were running 110 operations an hour. When we went to jets only, they don't perform the same way. Even though it's a small jet, it still doesn't perform the same as a prop. So we eliminated a lot of the normal things that we did, landing on different runways. We really feel it. I mean, now the average operations, like Ray said, is probably about 80 to 85 is a busy hour. And meanwhile, we were doing 110 a couple of years ago.
Yeah, see? That's-
Interesting.
Now imagine, Ralph, if these aircraft were VTOL back in the day, instead of catching catch and land on 29 and 11, where you needed to actually sequence them now, and give them rollout. What if they could land on the numbers of 29 or land on the numbers of 11,
Or
right?
just,
Takes all your land
around, give me a parking lot.
I mean,
Yeah.
you can conceivably convert runway 11 at Newark, at least the western 2/3 of it, into a bunch of hell spots.
Well, here's the thought. I actually have to head out, guys, but I'm going to leave you with one thought. Talk about scalability with our aircraft and model. If we put all of the traffic, all the regional traffic that our aircraft has the range to do into LaGuardia and shifted everything to Newark and JFK, we could free up 2/3 of the land area of LaGuardia for development.
I'll leave
So
that for another discussion.
Another discussion, but this has been great. I'm sorry I have to bug out because I'm having a good time. So
We've got a lot more questions, and I'll capture them, Alex, and see what I can do with them, and maybe we get you some answers on these things. You got some really valid questions here. Peter, I think you might even be able to see them there, because I think most of them are directed toward you. I know you got to go, and everybody's kind of saying that dinner's on the table, so why don't we wrap this up? And I want to thank you guys. I want to thank everybody, our panelists, if you want to call, I should say our hangout guys at the bar here, because it's not a panel, right? This is laid back. This is the happy hour. Everybody who showed up to the happy hour to join us in a drink, we really appreciate it. Ron, thank you again for sponsoring. Thank you to all the companies that make liquor so we can drink it. And that's it. Let's call it. Have a great night,
all
everybody.
right.
This will be posted, by the way, on our
Cheers.
site. We're gonna post it on our site. We're going to post it on YouTube. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks,
Cheers.
everyone.
See you,
Bye.
everybody.
Cheers.
And I don't have a log of Olin. I'm finished. I'm going to go for Lafroig.
Beautiful.
There you go.
Thanks for coming, Wasi. Appreciate it.
All the best, guys.
Take care.